The year was 1943. High in the jagged, ice-locked peaks of the Aleutian Islands sat Station Kilo 9. It wasn't a base for planes or ships. It was a weather observatory perched on a cliff, so steep the men had to be hauled up in a cable car. The air was a permanent blizzard of Willisaw's sudden, violent winds that could rip the goggles off a man's face in seconds. Corporal Silas Cloudy Vance was the lead meteorologist. He was a quiet man from the rolling hills of Vermont, used to snow but unprepared for the Arctic's cruelty. His world was a small circular room filled with mercury barometers, ticking anemometers, and the smell of stale coffee and coal smoke. The weight of the atmosphere, life at Kilo 9, was a battle against silence. Because the station was top secret, the men couldn't use the radio for anything but official reports. They lived in a hush-hush world, watching the clouds while the rest of the world watched the headlines. The soldiers lived in a reinforced bunker buried beneath 6 feet of ice. They measured their days by the rising and falling of the mercury. If Silas made a mistake, if he missed a sudden drop in pressure or a shift in the jet stream, the American carriers hundreds of miles away would launch their planes into a death trap of fog and ice. "Do you ever feel like the wind is trying to tell us something, Silas?" asked Miller, the youngest technician, as he listened to the gale shriek against the steel shutters. Silas adjusted his glasses. "The wind isn't talking, Miller. It's testing. It wants to see if we're paying attention. If we blink, it wins." The eye of the shadow one Tuesday in December, a massive cold front began to move down from the Bering Sea. At the same time, a fleet of U.S. bombers was preparing for a critical strike on a Japanese stronghold to the west. The mission relied on a 4-hour clear window that Silas had predicted. But as the bombers took off, Silas noticed a terrifying anomaly. The barometer didn't just drop, it plummeted. A ghost storm, a freak weather event invisible to the lower altitude stations, was forming directly in the path of the fleet. "We have to warn them," Silas said, his voice tight. "If they hit that front, the ice will freeze their engines in mid-air." But the storm had already done its work. A massive gust had snapped the external radio mast, leaving the station blind and mute. The climb of the frozen finger, the mast sat 50 yards away on the Eagle's Ledge, a narrow strip of rock coated in 3 inches of black ice. The wind was gusting at 90 miles per hour. "You can't go out there," the sergeant yelled. "You'll be blown off the cliff before you reach the cable." Silas didn't answer. He put on his heavy fur parka, tied a climbing rope to the bunker's main support beam, and stepped into the white void. The wind hit him like a physical wall, freezing the moisture in his eyelashes instantly. He crawled on his stomach, his fingers searching for cracks in the ice. When he reached the mast, he saw the problem. A heavy sheet of ice had locked the directional antenna. He pulled out his mallet and began to strike the metal. Every blow sent a jarring shock through his frozen arms. The mast groaned and swayed over the 1,000-foot drop. With a final desperate swing, the ice shattered. Silas grabbed the manual crank and turned it, his breath coming in ragged, freezing gasps, until the antenna pointed back toward the fleet. The signal of life down in the bunker, the radio operator saw the signal light flicker to green. "We've got the link, sending the abort code now." The fleet, only minutes away from the storm's edge, received the frantic warning. They banked their planes and headed for a secondary airfield, clearing the ice front by less than a mile. Silas lay on the ledge, his heart hammering against the cold rock. He watched the faint, distant silhouettes of the bombers as they turned back. He stayed there for 10 minutes, unable to move, his body becoming part of the landscape of snow and stone. The morning of the sun. When the search party pulled him back inside, Silas was nearly a block of ice. They stripped him of his frozen gear and wrapped him in every blanket they had. The next morning, for the first time in a month, the clouds parted. A brilliant freezing sun hit the summit of Kilo 9, turning the island into a world of sparkling crystal. The sergeant walked in with a cup of hot broth. The admiral sent a message. Said he doesn't know who Cloudy is, but he owes him a bottle of the best bourbon in the Pacific. Silas looked out the small porthole at the clear blue sky. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt the warmth of the sun on his face. "I don't need the bourbon, Sarge," Silas whispered. "I just needed the clouds to break." The war eventually ended, and Station Calo 9 was left to the polar bears and the wind. The summit returned to its silence, but the story of the man who climbed into the teeth of the Arctic stayed in the hearts of every pilot who flew those cold northern skies.